So the Open Public Meetings Act basically provides that all actions and deliberations of governing bodies are to be conducted openly. That's the basic premise of the Open Public Meetings Act. The people don't give public officials the right to decide what's good for the people to know and what is not. And that's right in the state statutes. That's right in the beginning of the Open Public Meetings Act is the premise. Now this is not new. We've been dealing with the Open Public Meetings Act for a long time. It goes back to 1971. It was enacted as part of the Sunshine Laws, which was back about the time of Watergate. There was a lot of issues at that time about trust in government, and they adopted the Open Public Meetings Act, and the companion act that went with it is the Public Records Law. So those two kind of together were an attempt to open government up so citizens had access to their own government. It's in the state statutes. It's in Chapter 4230, and I'll try not to make this real legalistic, but I will be giving you some citations to it as we go through this. Now, as far as who's covered, of course, this is county, so county officials are covered, city officials are covered, town officials are covered, and special purpose districts. Really, all levels of government, local government, state agencies are also covered, are covered by the Open Public Meetings Act. And of course, everyone here, the county officials, are covered by this. Typical from from what they enacted, the state legislature exempted themselves. Now, it also applies, of course, it applies to the county commissioners. That's the group we're dealing with primarily. But I do want you to understand it applies to any sub-agency of a public agency that's created by ordinance or other legislative act. So any of the boards or commissions that have been set up officially by the county by a legislative act that have permanence that continue, they are also going to be covered. So your planning commission, civil service commission, those sorts of boards and commissions are also covered by the Open Public Meetings Act, and you have to comply with those. They have to comply with the regulations also. This is less of an issue for the county, I think, but when you form subcommittees of your bodies, if there's not a quorum, they usually are not covered. This is a big issue in cities because most cities have 5-member councils. And a lot of times they will form subcommittees of 2 members, less than a quorum. Those usually are not covered. But with the county commissioners, of course, we have a 3-member county commission. 2 members is a quorum. You're not going to be using subcommittees the same way that a city would. So I put this in there just to cover it, but I think it's of less significance at the county level. If you've got more than 3 planning commission members, it's a meeting of the planning commission. That's the way I'd look at it. Whenever you've got a quorum of that group there, they're meeting. When the 4th person walks in the room, it becomes a meeting. And so we really advise that you educate all your members of your commissions that they should not have, even to sit and listen is a question. But the temptation is to sit and listen and then ask a few questions and make a few comments. And pretty soon that 4th member is participating in the meeting, and then it's a quorum and it is a meeting. So I think it's safer, keep it to 3. Keep it to less than a quorum. Listening, you could argue, is not if you're just sitting, but to me the temptation is so great and it's so difficult to police that. And remember, at least part of this, in our view, is public perception and to inspire confidence that the rules are being followed. It's difficult, but it probably is not a technical violation if they could sit actually and just sit back in the audience. You know, you're up here and the 4th member's back in the audience, doesn't say a word, doesn't comment to anybody. I think arguably you're okay with that. It's more a risk of them having to get involved in and then potentially the members of the public being concerned. If that subcommittee has been delegated to take action on behalf of the full body, that would constitute a meeting. Most of the time, my experience has been those subcommittees just discuss and come back with recommendations to the main group. That's not delegation to take action. But if they've been delegated to take final action on something, then it would be subject. And the other two, if they're inviting outside comment, that's where this 19 group, I'm not quite sure, but if they're inviting outside comment from the public to the group, then that is subject to the Open Meetings Act. The third one's really about the same thing, I think. If they're conducting a hearing on behalf of the full body, then it's subject to the act. So there's 3 exceptions to my rule about the bright line rule is the quorum. Once you get a quorum, you've got a meeting. But the three other circumstances you have to be aware of is if they have been delegated to take public comment on something, hold a hearing, or act, then it's a meeting also. If they're going down to the clerk to get a list of names, that's really a public records question, and I would think the names of somebody on a body like that would be a public record. I'll talk about email in a little bit, because I think that may be the thrust of that question, really. Can form advisory citizen committees that aren't formally delegated with any particular duty except to provide a little bit of information back to the governing body, and they're very temporary in nature usually. Some of those committees don't rise to the level of being formed by a legislative act of the county and may not be subject to the act, although it certainly doesn't hurt to open those meetings up, whether you have to or not. Okay, this is basically what the Open Meetings Act says. It says that all meetings of a governing body of a public agency must be open and all persons must be permitted to attend. It says all final actions must be adopted at public meetings or they're invalid. And thirdly, it says no secret balloting. You have to be accountable for how you vote at a meeting. So that's really the heart of the Open Meetings Act. And then I'll discuss the ramifications, and I'll also discuss when the exceptions are, because this is a big part of the Act, when you can meet in executive session. But this really is the heart of the Act, that meetings of a governing body are open and the public is allowed to attend. It's open government. It's a sunshine law that basically allows the public to know what their government is doing. And one thing to be aware of, though, the definition of meeting is very broad. And it basically is a quorum of the governing body where action is taken, and action includes discussion, deliberation, public testimony, and so on. It definitely includes final action, which is voting, but it is not limited to final action. And this is one point that sometimes I think is a little bit confusing. But a meeting at which only discussion occurs can and does constitute a public meeting if a quorum is there, even though no vote is ever taken. So it's important to be aware that just by meeting and discussing, you can be holding a meeting under the definition in the Open Public Meetings Act. And go to number 2 for a second. The title of the meeting really doesn't matter. You can call it a work session, you can call it a study session, you can call it a retreat. Again, going back to the definition, you have a quorum present and they're discussing county business, public business. That is a meeting. And the title that you called it doesn't constitute whether it falls under the Open Meetings Act or not. Now, this doesn't restrict the commissioners or the governing body from social gatherings. If all the commissioners are present at a high school football game or at a annual picnic in the city, the county, and it's a social occasion and they're discussing the football game and so on, that's not a violation of the Open Public Meetings Act. There's no public business being discussed. And they can travel together. Sometimes this happens. I know you're going to a conference somewhere or going on public business. They can travel in the same car. It doesn't exclude them from doing that. But the topic of conversation should not be public business, because that potentially could be a meeting. Well, it is somewhat subjective, but I do think that it is up to the elected officials to be very cautious about this. And like you say, the line, it may not in all cases be crystal clear, but usually I think it's fairly distinct, whether you're talking about the high school football team or your kids or where you're going on vacation. Once you get over to anything that relates to business that might come back before this body in some way or another, in any form really at all, that becomes public business, and that's where you've got to say. And even if it's the citizen coming up to you, which certainly could happen, they know who you are, and say, "Oh, I just want to bring this up and make this point." It really is incumbent on you, if there's a couple of you present. Now, one-on-one, you're okay with this. Remember, not trying to say that citizens can't have access to their public elected officials. I don't want to take that away from this, because that is not restricted. But the difficulty with the county commissioner form, having a 3-member commission, is that 2 of you becomes the quorum, and so that makes this, I think, even more. You have to be even more careful to comply. But it is somewhat a subjective standard. But I think the line, when in doubt, I would say don't discuss.